Welcome, my fellow thrill seekers, to another intriguing episode of Restless Killers and Mysteries with Roger Heilig. Today's spine-chilling story is brought to you by our amazing sponsor, Beyond the Grassy Knoll: How JFK's Death Changed American Society Forever. A thought-provoking read by A.M. Wolfe, available on Amazon and Audible. If you're a fan of digging deep into the annals of history and uncovering the truths behind some of our most pivotal moments, I highly recommend you give it a look. Now, let's turn our attention to today's topic, a tale so dark and twisted it has haunted Hollywood and the American psyche for decades. Picture this. It's the late 1960s, a time of free love, counterculture movements, and the rise of a dangerous man named Charles Manson. Manson, with his intense gaze and magnetic, and ultimately sinister, charisma, managed to gather around him a dedicated following of young people, many of whom would go on to commit some of the most brutal murders in American history. Today, we delve into the terrifying saga of the Manson family murders. These heinous acts, orchestrated by Manson himself, reached their bloody zenith with the murder of the beautiful and talented actress Sharon Tate, along with 4 others, on a warm August night in 1969. As we explore the ripple effects these shocking events had on Hollywood and society at large, we'll shed light on the twisted vision Manson preached and how it led to a series of unimaginable horrors. So, grab a comforting drink, settle into your coziest chair, and prepare yourself for a journey into the macabre. I promise it'll be a fascinating ride. Let's dive into the shocking events orchestrated by Charles Manson. The 1960s. What a time to be alive, folks. It was an era marked by more than just tie-dye shirts and groovy tunes. It was a cultural revolution that shook society to its core. Now, imagine a world of free love, psychedelic rock, and a general sense of rebellion against the man. This heady mix was the perfect breeding ground for someone like Charles Manson to step in and wreak havoc. During the late 60s, there was this incredible surge of youthful energy that questioned everything. This was the counterculture movement. Young people were rejecting traditional norms, exploring spirituality, and seeking new ways to experience life. It was peace signs, flower power, and a big ol' thumbs down to the establishment. But, as we often find, light shades darkness, and the 1960s had its shadows too. One major influence was the Vietnam War. America was deeply divided. Protests were happening on college campuses, and there was a palpable sense of unrest. The young didn't trust the old. You've got to understand, the country was scarred by images of violence broadcasted nightly into living rooms across the nation. This war wasn't just fought overseas, it was fought in the hearts and minds of Americans every day. On top of that, you've got the civil rights movement, another catalyst for change. People were pushing for equality like never before. It was inspiring, yes, but also incredibly tense. In this bubbling cauldron of change, there were those who were susceptible to radical ideas, people who were looking for a leader, any leader, to help make sense of their chaotic world. Enter Charles Manson. The drugs, oh man, the drugs were everywhere. LSD was almost a rite of passage. It's no surprise that Manson took advantage of this. When you're on a trip, questioning the very nature of reality, someone who speaks with confidence and offers answers can easily seem like some kind of guru. That was Charles Manson, the wrong man at the right time. And let's not forget the music. Music was more than just background noise. It was the lifeblood of the movement. Bands like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and the Doors were setting the soundtrack for this time of upheaval. But one album, in particular, influenced Manson, the Beatles' White Album. Its lyrics, Manson claimed, were secret messages just for him, detailing a race war he later called Helter Skelter. Yeah, it sounds like a bad acid trip, but this was deadly serious for Manson and his followers. So, in a nutshell, the 1960s counterculture was this vibrant, youthful explosion of ideas and rebellion. It was a time when boundaries were being stretched like never before. Picture thousands of young people searching for meaning, freedom, and a new way to exist. Unfortunately, in that quest, they were vulnerable to manipulation. And Charles Manson, with his uniquely twisted charisma, capitalized on this vulnerability, drawing in those who were already feeling lost in the shuffle of the ongoing societal upheaval. And that's how the stage was set. A decade of radical transformation, a quest for deeper understanding, drugs loosening the grip on reality, and a society ripe for exploitation by someone ready to step in and fill the void. Now, with that vivid backdrop in mind, let's take a closer look at the twisted mastermind himself, Charles Manson. Charles Manson, just the name sends a shiver down the spine. An enigma wrapped in a whirlwind of violence and infamy. So who was this man, really? Well, buckle up, because understanding Manson is like peeling an onion. Each layer gets more pungent and disturbing. Born in 1934 to an unwed teenage mother in Cincinnati, Ohio, Manson's childhood was far from idyllic. His mother was often absent, leaving young Charlie in the care of various relatives, or worse, alone in a slew of state institutions. By the age of 13, he had already dabbled in petty crimes, setting the stage for a life that would soon take a darker turn. Now, what's bizarre is that despite these rocky beginnings, Manson had an air of magnetic charisma. It's like he had this twisted talent for reading people. especially those who were vulnerable, insecure, or at odds with society. But don't get me wrong, his charm wasn't the romantic kind. It was more like the allure of a storm, powerful, dangerous, and utterly captivating if you were caught in its eye. Fast forward to the late 1960s, and we find Manson trying, unsuccessfully mind you, to carve out a career as a musician. Somewhere between jail stints and failed gigs, he landed in the epicenter of the counterculture movement. Think of it: peace, love, and rock and roll. But Manson's tune was more like a twisted dirge, and he played it in communities ripe for exploitation. So, how did he manage to attract a devoted following? Enter the Manson family, a motley crew of young, disenchanted individuals who were searching for meaning in an increasingly chaotic world. Manson found many of these followers in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district, a swirling mix of resistance, psychedelia, and naivety. He promised them not just love, but a new world where they were valued for more than their broken pasts. Manson employed a heady cocktail of pseudo-hippie idealism, drug-induced visions, and good old-fashioned emotional manipulation to draw these young people in. He filled their minds with apocalyptic ideas and distorted interpretations of songs, none more famously than the Beatles' Helter Skelter, which he claimed prophesies an impending racial war. And voila, they hung on to his every word, almost like disciples to a mad prophet. Take the likes of Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, for instance. These were ordinary young women who, under Manson's spell, morphed into perpetrators of some of the most notorious crimes in American history. Manson found their vulnerabilities, poked at their insecurities, and then filled the void with his own demented doctrines. He offered them a sense of family, an escape from reality, and horrifically, a purpose through violence. One can't overlook Manson's own turbulent psyche in this devastating equation. Psychologists have described him as a textbook sociopath, demonstrating a complete lack of remorse, an inflated sense of his own importance, and an unabiding thrill in controlling others. But if you peel back another layer, you see a man riddled with paranoia, delusions of grandeur, and a profound hatred for the societal forces he felt had wronged him. His followers didn't come from the dregs of society. They were often middle-class Americans who had veered off course. Manson's charisma was that compelling, his manipulation that skilled. He represented a rejection of the mainstream, offering an insidious alternative to the disillusioned youth of the time. So, there you have it, a failed musician with a criminal past and dangerous charisma, molding a group of young people into something far more sinister than the sum of their parts. Charles Manson wasn't just a man, he became a horrifying symbol of what happens when charisma meets chaos in a world already turned upside down. Alright, so who were these people that Charles Manson managed to lure into his bizarre world? They were known as the Manson family. But unlike the typical idea of family dining together or celebrating holidays, this family was more akin to a cult, with Manson as the twisted patriarch. So, who were these followers? Let's take a closer look at some of the key members and explore their backgrounds and what made them susceptible to Manson's control. First up, we have Susan Atkins, also known as Sadie Mae Glutz. Susan had a tumultuous upbringing. Her mother died of cancer when she was just 15, and her father, unable to cope, became distant. By her teenage years, Susan had fallen into a wild lifestyle of drugs and petty crime. When she met Charles Manson, she was already a lost soul yearning for a sense of belonging. Manson's promise of love and salvation resonated with her deeply, filling the void left by her fractured family. Tragically, she would go on to be one of the most brutal participants in the Manson family's crimes. Then there's Patricia Krenwinkel, affectionately called Katie within the group. Patricia struggled with self-esteem issues throughout her life. As a child, she was teased for her weight and appearance, and she never quite felt like she fit in anywhere. Her insecurities made her susceptible to Manson's charms. Patricia saw Manson as someone who accepted her unconditionally, and in return, she offered him unwavering loyalty. Her involvement in the murders is a dark testament to the extent of Manson's manipulative powers. Now, let's talk about Leslie Van Houten. Leslie was perhaps the most tragic case of all. Brought up in a middle-class household, Leslie initially led what many would consider a normal life. However, after her parents' divorce and a few rebellious teenage years, Leslie began drifting. By the time she met the Manson family, she was already experimenting with LSD and searching for deeper meaning in her life. Leslie said she was drawn to Manson's philosophies, believing him to be a kind of messianic figure. She felt like she was part of something bigger, a revolutionary movement, which tragically turned out to be based on madness and violence. Manson's followers were all searching for something: love, acceptance, a sense of purpose, and Manson exploited these needs with chilling expertise. He used a combination of psychological manipulation, drugs, and his skewed vision of an impending race war, which he dubbed Helter Skelter, to to control them. Manson preached about a violent uprising where the family would emerge as the new leaders of a racially cleansed society, a vision that captivated these vulnerable young people looking for direction. It wasn't just the women who fell under Manson's spell. Male followers like Tex Watson also played crucial roles in the violent acts carried out. Tex was a former high school football star who had turned to drug dealing and heavy substance abuse. Like the others, he found a sense of belonging with Manson, who skillfully manipulated Tex's vulnerabilities to turn him into a loyal and zealous enforcer of Manson's nightmarish plans. So, as you can see, the Manson family was a group of lost and searching individuals who found themselves under the sway of a compelling, albeit deranged, leader. They were people with stories, insecurities, and dreams that Manson twisted for his own horrific purposes. Understanding the backgrounds and psychological makeup of these individuals provides a disturbing glance into how easily human vulnerability can be exploited and manipulated. Alright folks, that's a closer look at the Manson family. A group that, while deeply flawed and driven by deplorable actions, were once just young people searching for something meaningful in a chaotic world. On the night of August 8, 1969, a gruesome series of events would forever etch itself into the collective memory of Hollywood and the world. Picture this: a serene mansion at 10050 Cielo Drive, nestled in the Hollywood Hills. Its tranquility was shattered by a group of individuals whose names and actions would soon horrify millions. Sharon Tate, the glamorous actress married to director Roman Polanski, was 8.5 months pregnant, hosting a small gathering at her home. Around midnight, as the guests mingled and enjoyed the evening, 4 members of the so-called Manson family approached the property. These were Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Under Charles Manson's twisted guidance, they were on a mission to incite chaos and terror. Their entry was both stealthy and brutal, cutting telephone lines to prevent any calls for help. As they broke in, the horror began. The first victim was a teenage visitor named Stephen Parent, who was leaving the guest house. He was shot by Watson and quickly became the night's first casualty. The intruders then moved to the main house, where they encountered Sharon Tate and her guests, Jay Sebring, a celebrity hairstylist, Abigail Folger, heiress to the Folger coffee fortune, her boyfriend, Wojciech Frykowski, and Sharon herself. The Manson family members unleashed unspeakable violence. Bound and helpless, the victims were subjected to a frenzy of stabbing, bludgeoning, and shooting. Sharon Tate, pleading for the life of her unborn child, met a gruesome end alongside her friends. The brutality was so unthinkable that describing the exact details feels nightmarish. In the aftermath inside the house, the scene was one of unimaginable bloodshed. Manson's followers scrawled words in blood on the walls, including pig, leaving an indelible mark of evil. Their aim was to ignite fear and chaos, and they achieved it. News of the murders sent shockwaves throughout Hollywood, an industry known for its glitz and glamour now facing an outrageous and terrifying reality. The immediate reaction in Hollywood was intense fear and paranoia. Security measures were ramped up. Celebrities secluded themselves behind gated estates, and the community, which previously basked in a laid-back California vibe, was clouded with anxiety and suspicion. People changed their locks, bought guard dogs, and armed themselves, creating an atmosphere of mistrust and panic. This wasn't just another crime, it was a brutal assault on the sense of safety and normalcy. Friends and colleagues of the victims were horrified, and the media frenzy that followed only magnified the fear. The effect was palpable, with an entire city, and eventually, a nation, struggling to come to terms with the sheer monstrosity of what had occurred. The violence was so extreme that it led to a deeper dissection of the counterculture movement of the 1960s. This wasn't just about Hollywood anymore, it was about the broader changes in society, the fragility of the peace and love movement, and a darker undercurrent that Manson and his followers epitomized. More than 5 decades later, the shocking Tate murders continue to resonate. They dismantled the innocent allure of the 1960s, casting a shadow that would influence crime narratives, law enforcement, and cultural perceptions for years. So, as you sit back and ponder this dark chapter, remember that it's not just a story of a gruesome murder, it's a tale of a pivotal shift in the American psyche, forever altering how we perceive safety, community, and the very nature of evil. A hauntingly short 24 hours after the savage Tate murders, Charles Manson directed his so-called family to commit another round of brutal killings. This time, the targets were Leno and Rosemary LaBianca. Who were they, you ask? Well, Leno was a prosperous supermarket executive, and Rosemary a successful businesswoman. They lived in a relatively quiet and affluent neighborhood in Los Angeles, completely unaware of the nightmare that awaited them. On the evening of August 9, 1969, Charles Manson himself entered the LaBianca home initially to make sure everything was under control. That's right, the man behind the malevolent madness stood there, looking like an unassuming surfer-turned-drifter but with a mind full of maniacal plans. He tied up Leno and Rosemary and then left, assigning his most loyal followers, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Leslie Van Houten, to carry out the actual murders. Imagine the LaBiancas, bound and terrified, having no clue why this was happening to them. Manson's followers were not just ordinary criminals. They believed they were warriors in a mythic race war that Manson called Helter Skelter, an apocalyptic nightmare he prophesies would annihilate the establishment and herald an era where he would rule. Yes, Manson twisted the lyrics of a popular Beatles song into an inflammatory doctrine, making it part of his demented cult's gospel. Leno LaBianca was stabbed multiple times, and a carving fork was left protruding from his stomach. A knife was similarly embedded in his throat, effectively turning his last moments into a grotesque horror novel. Rosemary met a similarly grisly fate in the neighboring room, handcuffed and stabbed 31 times. As a dark flourish, the killers left messages scrawled in blood around the house, rise and death to pigs. They also wrote Helter Skelter on the fridge door, misspelling the word and all, encapsulating the horrifying randomness of their actions. Now you might wonder, why were the LaBiancas chosen? They were, unfortunately, victims of circumstance and random selection. The killers needed a target, and the LaBianca house seemed opportune and vulnerable. When Manson drove through Los Angeles, picking homes at random, it wasn't personal for him. These killings were meant to be chaotic symbols, designed to ignite the race war he disturbingly fantasized about. These homicides weren't just attacks, they were psychological warfare, intended to instill terror. For Hollywood and the greater public, this was a devastating realization that horror could strike anywhere. The LaBianca murders sent shockwaves through society, proving that no one, regardless of status or seclusion, was safe. This was an unthinkable pivot from the summer of love just 2 years prior. The Manson family's killing spree was an ill omen, signifying the end of the 60s peace and love dream, and ushering in an era of mistrust and disillusionment. Imagine looking over your shoulder, locking your doors, and wondering if you might be the next target. Helter Skelter indeed. The significance of these brutal murders went beyond the immediate terror. They became landmarks in criminal history, showing what unchecked charisma and blind following could achieve. Manson had turned vague, rebellious undertones of the counterculture into acts of cold-blooded murder, forever marring the legacy of the 1960s. In examining the LaBianca murders, we're not just looking at another crime statistic, but a profound marker of societal change. Manson took the cultural upheaval of the 60s and twisted it, exploiting young minds and turning them into instruments of his apocalyptic fantasies. The LaBiancas were random victims, but their deaths meant something far broader, a chilling testament to how quickly the rise of a utopian dream could spiral into a nightmare. So, as we leave the LaBianca home, still etched in macabre memory, let's pause and think about the horrifying impact of Manson's twisted vision. It wasn't just the murders, it was the cold, calculated message behind them that sent shivers down the spine of a nation. Alright, let's talk about the investigation and arrest of the Manson family, one of the most talked about police pursuits in history. After the horrifying murders of Sharon Tate and the LaBiancas, you bet the pressure was on for the LAPD to crack the case. Initially, the police had no clue these crimes were connected. They were grasping at straws, hunting down leads that led them to dead ends. It was a wild goose chase that had Hollywood's elite clutching their pearls. Now, here's where things start to take a twist. You see, it wasn't some high-profile detective or groundbreaking forensic evidence that blew the case wide open. Nope, it was good old-fashioned gossip. At the time, there was a known hippie commune at the Spawn Ranch, where Manson and his motley crew were squatting. And it wasn't long before authorities started hearing whispers about the bizarre activities happening there. In fact, Manson and some of his followers were already on the police radar for unrelated crimes. They were picked up on charges of car theft and arson, which led investigators to start piecing things together. And then came the big break. Susan Atkins, one of Manson's most devoted followers, couldn't keep her mouth shut. While in custody for another crime, she bragged to her cellmate about the Tate killings. Talk about loose lips sinking ships. Atkins' confession was the tip-off law enforcement needed. They began connecting the dots between the Manson family and the gruesome murders. The ranch was raided, and one by one, members of the Manson family were arrested. This wasn't a 48-hour case cracked wide open. This took months of sleuthing and untangling a web of hatred and hype. Charles Manson himself was elusive, a puppeteer trying to pull strings from behind the curtain. But eventually, he was cornered. On December 1, 1969, the police captured Manson hiding in a crawlspace. True to form, he went down like a villain in a Hollywood script, all theatrics and psychotic charm. The arrest was a media circus, with Manson's notorious swastika carved into his forehead and his mesmerizing, almost hypnotic demeanor. The headlines practically wrote themselves. These weren't just common criminals, they were characters in a horror novel come to life. As the police rounded up more members of the Manson family, the nation was given a spine-tingling grand tour through Manson's delusional world. The stories that surfaced were stranger than fiction, and yet this horror show was all too real. So, there you have it. How a combination of sheer police determination, a stroke of dumb luck, and some untimely blabbering led to the capture of Charles Manson and his followers. The case cracked wide open, leading to one of the most shocking trials in American history. And if you think these arrests were dramatic, just wait until you hear about the courtroom antics that followed. But that's a tale for another time. Alright folks, we're diving into what has been often referred to as the trial of the century. Picture it, a courtroom packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and a nation glued to their television sets. Charles Manson and his followers were finally brought to justice, and let me tell you, it was nothing short of a drama-filled spectacle. The trial began on July 24, 1970, and if Hollywood screenwriters had cooked up the script, they probably would have turned it down for being too far-fetched. Imagine, if you will, Manson himself showing up with a scraggly beard and an ominous X carved into his forehead. This was a mark he encouraged his family members to replicate, a bizarre symbol of their devotion to his twisted ideologies. The prosecution, led by Vincent Bugliosi, painted a clear and chilling picture. He outlined how Manson had orchestrated the murders, not by getting his hands dirty himself, but by manipulating his devoted followers to carry out his deadly bidding. Bugliosi famously argued that Manson used a combination of mind control, psychological manipulation, and sheer charisma to compel his followers to commit these heinous acts. It wasn't all smooth sailing for the prosecution, though. Enter Linda Kasabian, the star witness, who had driven the getaway car for both the Tate and LaBianca murders. Kasabian, who had received immunity in exchange for her testimony, painted stark, chilling scenes of the nights in question. Her testament provided the crux of the prosecution's case, vividly detailing the nauseating brutality that had unfurled under Manson's orders. And then, the defense. Oh boy. Manson's defense attorneys struggled to build a credible case. Manson's bizarre antics included leaping onto the defense table claiming, "These children, everything they've done for love of their brother." Well, love doesn't quite cover murder, Charlie. His followers also didn't help. At one point, Susan Atkins lunged at the judge, and Leslie Van Houten carved an X into her own forehead in solidarity with Manson. The whole courtroom was a circus. At one point, Manson even tried to attack the presiding judge, Judge Charles Older, right there in the courtroom. Fortunately, he was tackled by bailiffs before he could reach the judge, a moment that underscored just how unhinged and terrifying he was. And let's not forget, Manson's own defense strategy hinged on trying to make a mockery of the court, attempting to control and disrupt the proceedings as much as possible. For those watching, it was a mix of horror and disbelief. As the trial dragged on, the courtroom became a revolving door of testimonies, each more damning than the last. The defense tried every trick in the book, but the evidence was insurmountable. And there was a moment of sheer shock when Manson tried, unsuccessfully, to testify himself. The judge wisely saw through this as yet another ploy for control and shut it down. Manson's control over his followers didn't end with the trial. Even from behind bars, his influence was palpable. His followers outside the courtroom often demonstrated their unwavering allegiance by gathering, singing Manson-penned songs, and carving X's into their foreheads. And so, after 9 grueling months, on January 25, 1971, the jury delivered the verdict, guilty. Manson and his co-defendants, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten, were all sentenced to death. However, in 1972, California abolished the death penalty, commuting their sentences to life imprisonment. The Manson family trial was more than a legal proceeding. It was a lens through which the world saw the stark reality of mind control, vulnerability, and the dark underbelly of the 1960s counterculture. It was a turning point, reverberating through the decades. It served as a grim reminder of how charisma and manipulation can intersect with devastating and deadly results. So there you have it, the courtroom drama of the century that held a nation spellbound, made headlines around the world, and ensured that Charles Manson's name would forever be synonymous with pure, unadulterated evil. The Manson family murders left an indelible mark on American society, reshaping the cultural and social fabric of the nation in ways that persist to this day. The impact was multifaceted, touching Hollywood, law enforcement, and the public's sense of safety and security. First, let's talk about Hollywood. The murder of actress Sharon Tate and her friends on August 8, 1969, stunned the entertainment industry. Hollywood, which had long been a symbol of glamour and safety, suddenly felt vulnerable. The sense of invincibility that surrounded its glittering hills evaporated overnight. Studios tightened security, celebrities moved to gated communities, and an undercurrent of fear permeated the entertainment capital. This brutal reality check has reverberated through the industry ever since, influencing how celebrities conduct their private lives, and how the industry as a whole addresses issues of safety and security. In the realm of pop culture, the Manson murders also left a deep scar. From movies and TV series to music and literature, the events have been revisited time and again as a symbol of lost innocence and the dark side of the counterculture movement. Manson himself became a macabre icon, influencing everything from punk rock bands to horror movies. This continued fascination underscores a morbid curiosity with the events and serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of societal norms. The murders pushed society to question the very fabric of its moral and social constructs. How could a group of young people be so easily manipulated into committing such heinous acts? This spurred a wave of academic interest in cult behaviors, psychological manipulation, and the sociological factors that lead individuals to join such groups. Seminars, documentaries, and television specials continually explore these questions, ensuring that the lessons of the Manson family murders are not forgotten. In summary, the aftermath and legacy of the Manson family murders are complex and far-reaching. The brutal events forced Hollywood to rethink its sense of security, pressured law enforcement to improve its investigative techniques, and shattered public perceptions of personal safety. Moreover, they left a lasting imprint on American culture, prompting continual examination and reflection on how such atrocities could happen. This tragic chapter in history serves as a grim reminder that the line between normalcy and chaos can be perilously thin. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the dark corners of history with Restless Killers and Mysteries with Roger Heilig. I hope today's exploration of the Manson family murders shed some light on this chilling series of events that forever changed Hollywood and American society. Before we wrap things up, a quick shout out to our generous sponsor, Beyond the Grassy Knoll, How JFK's Death Changed American Society Forever by A.M. Wolfe. If you're fascinated by mysterious events and their far-reaching impacts, this riveting book is a must-read. Available on Amazon and Audible. Definitely worth checking out. Remember folks, the world can be a strange and unsettling place, but there's a certain charm in unraveling its mysteries together, one spine-tingling episode at a time. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss any of the captivating stories we have lined up. Join me next time for another journey into the macabre and the mysterious. Stay curious, stay safe, and until next time, keep those lights on. This is Roger Heilig, signing off from Restless Killers and Mysteries. Catch you later.